Hello, my name's Rob and welcome to SwiftSlots. Now a few months ago I was walking around my local town and we had a market, and in that market was a whole range of small traders, and one of them was a 3D printer called ABBA Prints. And I was looking on his stand and there's some really nice stuff there, but one thing caught my eye more than anything else, and it was this, my 3D printed dragon. Absolutely fantastic looking thing. I thought that would make a really good slot car, and I went home and I thought about it and I thought, I think it could work. Wouldn't it look awesome going around the track, a 2.5 feet or 2 foot long dragon, all iridescent and all shining, whizzing around all the bends. I thought, nah, it's got to be done. So I gave them a shout. They said they would do me a deal on one. They printed it off in a special tricolour colour that I chose. I think it was red, green and blue. And here we are. We've got the dragon. It's absolutely beautiful and I love it. So we're going to turn it into a slot car. So let's get it on my table and I'll show you what parts I'm going to put in it. And then we'll go to a track and then we'll run it round and watch it looking really cool. And warning, I have no idea if this is going to work. Okay, so here is my fantastic dragon. Just look at the colours on this dragon. You got purple and blue and green when it suits it. This thing is going to look absolutely fantastic running around the track. Now it's not actually 2 foot long, it's actually 21 inches long. As I recall, I actually ordered it that long to try and get the best length versus the bends and everything else, because there's going to be quite a lot of resistance on this going around the track. So I didn't want to make it too long, so I don't want it in too many bends at any one time to cause too much resistance, because like I say, I have no idea if this is going to work or not. But if it does work, what a cool thing this is going to be. Imagine this all snaking around. Now a lot of you won't know, but I have very, very deep roots in model railways. In fact, model railways is where I started, and a lot of model railwaying I still do to this day. I've been involved in an awful lot of different scales, from T gauge or Z gauge all the way through to ride-on 5-inch gauge and everything in between. So railways are really my thing. So you can imagine this going around the track is very, very reminiscent to a whole rake of coaches or a DMU or something going around a long track all around the bends, and this is going to be very, very similar to that in feel for me at the very least. It's just going to look absolutely fantastic, and all these colours all sort of bouncing off as it goes around, or changing colour shifting. I think it's going to look absolutely fantastic. So as we can see, it's a traditional ice dragon, I believe they call it, and I chose this one over other ones because I just liked the horns. They're just really nice. And you can see the eye in there. Now the eye will be relevant in a minute, but look at the colours on that. It's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. I can't wait to see this thing going around the track. And as you can see, it all goes blue as well. Absolutely stunning. And the underside, very nice clean print on the underneath as well, all the way through to his tail. Look at that. This is going to be so nice. I just can't wait to do it. Right, so there is our dragon. So what parts are we going to put in him? So first off, we're going to try these Penelope Pit Lane slim can motors. Now these are 16k, because I really don't think we need to get the dragon to go flying around the track. It may not go around the track at all, so I don't think we need more power. So these little 16k motors I think will work absolutely perfectly, and I'm pretty sure they're going to fit 2 of them in his belly. Now for the tyres, I've got 2 options. This was my original option. Now these are Pendle Slot Racing 10-inch alloy wheels, and they are part number PCS 32100995, and then the tyres are PP-MT, and they're quite sticky. Now I think these are F22 rubber, so they're reasonably sticky. They're quite good, but they're quite narrow, and the reason why I chose these is because I need to try and get them under his shoulders and his hips. And I thought these might do the job, but I was a bit skeptical as to how much grip I'm going to get with these narrow tyres, because there's going to be a load of guides on this and there's going to be a lot of resistance. So I'm not sure whether these are going to be grippy enough. So as an option, I've also got a set of these. Now these are Pendle Slot Racing 16-inch alloys, and they are PCS-32161408, and the tyres are the RTO3s, but they're in F15 rubber. Now the F15 rubber is super grippy, so these particular tyres are 10mm wide, and I say they're in F15 compound as well, so they're really, really grippy, and they're significantly wider than what I was going to use, so they're wider and they're also grippier. So if I can get these ones into his hips and shoulders, I think these will be the way to go. Though these will give a lot of grip, and I wouldn't have any problems with this dragon being dragged around using these tyres. But we'll have to wait and see when we get there as to whether these tyres will work. I'll start with trying to fit these, and then maybe we'll have to shift over to these if I just can't get these in. So that's the tyres. Now for the gears, I've got these very, very small all-slot 22 tooth inline gears, because I think they will be absolutely fine for the job. So I've got to be a bit careful because my wheels are not very big, so I can't really go mad on the size of tyre. Even if I use my larger wheel, yeah, they are actually fine for that, but I don't have any gears bigger than this. So they only got to about 25 tooth anyway, so I think these will be fine. They should be absolutely adequate for the job, and they're only 16k motors, so you can afford to go up a little bit on the gearing, but it'd be nice if I could have something like a 25 tooth to give it a little bit more favourable gearing, give it a bit more torque and a bit less top speed. But the gears can be changed out. If I find it's undrivable or not enough power generated because there's not enough teeth on there, I can always go and replace these gears with some slightly larger ones. But we'll start with these 22s and we'll see how they go. I'm sure they'll be absolutely fine. And for the axles, I've been digging around in my spares box and I found a full length SRP axle, and I found half of an SRP axle. I'm pretty sure we only need half, and if I can get away with it, I can take one full length SRP axle and chop it straight in half and then use that for both axles, because it's not going to be very wide. The hips and shoulders are quite narrow on this car, so I don't think I'm going to be able to use, I don't think I'm going to need much axle, so hopefully just chopping the 75mm axle clean in half will do the job. But these are standard SRP hardened axles. They come as a pack of 10 and they're very, very good. Always use hardened axles because there's no replacement for really good quality axles. So the pinion gears, now you can ignore what's written on the packet because I've put the wrong gears back in this packet, but what we've got is a pair of 1.5mm hold pinions that are 6mm in diameter and they're 10 tooth. And the reason why I'm going to use a 6mm gear is because if you have a 1.5mm shaft and you put it into a normal standard 32 scale crown gear, there's a lot of play. Now you can either put a shim on the end of the shaft, or you can use a 6mm pinion gear, and that pushes the shaft over and re-engages the mesh nicely, and everything works out well with a 6mm pinion. So that's why I've got some 6mm pinions there, because it takes out the slop of the 1.5mm shaft. Okay, so you knew it was coming. I'm going to use a Slotting Plus guide for the front of this dragon because I like them and they work really, really well. However, for the rest of the dragon, I'm going to be using these. Now, these are old guides that I've taken out of previous Skeletrix projects. These are the old style guides, and I'm going to dot these all the way down the length of the dragon to keep the rest of his body in tow. Now, they won't have any braids put on them. They'll just be the straight up guide, although there may be a braid somewhere in the middle of his stomach just to aid in a little bit of more electrical conductivity. But for the most part, these will all be trimmed down and then put all the way down his tail and body to keep everything in the right place. Now this is a little bit cool. So these are LEDs and they're going to go in his eyes. So I like to use a brand on eBay called Bright Components. He's very, very good. He answers all of his all your emails. He's very, very good with his supplies. He's very quick on delivery. He's not too expensive, and he gives a really good range of products that we can use for slot cars. Now, one of the things he does offer for slot cars, well, they're not for slot cars, but we use them in slot cars, are these lovely pre-wired LEDs. Now, these are absolutely microscopic. These are the smallest ones that he does. They are absolutely tiny. They're almost as small as the wire, and the wire is ridiculously small as well. And I've tested these and they give a really, really bright light. And what I intend to do is put these microscopic LEDs right in his eye, right in there. And that's going to look really, really nice. I say I've tested these and they're really bright and they'll give a really good glow. But obviously with an LED, you need a resistor. So I bought these resistors from the guy as well. You can forget that, they're in the wrong packet. And there's the part number there for the resistors. And these resistors are good for all the LEDs he sells, not just the low powered ones. You can buy these ones and they'll work for everything. So if you want to get your LEDs and your resistors and bits and bobs like that, see Bright Components on eBay, at least if you're in the UK, because he's really helpful and it's got a really good selection of LEDs and resistors and bits and bobs like that that can be used for slot cars. I've got some flashing yellow LEDs that I've got from him from a future project, which you will see. So really good guy to deal with. Okay, so here are the components that we've got, and here is our beautiful tricolour iridescent dragon to try and slotify. So I don't know if this is going to work, but we can only try. So over to the bench and let's turn this little dragon into a track monster. Okay, so where on earth to start with a project like this? This is something quite unique and it's taken me a little while to get my head around how on earth I'm going to try and work it out. But I've made a start. I've removed his leg because I think the best place to start is working out how to get these wheels into his hips and his shoulders. Once I've gotten to that point, I think the rest of it will be relatively easy. So I think I can get the wheel in there just below these two triangular outer spikes. I think she'll fit in there, that wheel, and there's plenty of distance height wise, and I think there's enough depth. There's certainly enough distance, and then the leg should be able to go back on, and I should be able to get that center spike to line back up with that middle piece in there and just glue it back on, or maybe even put a bar in there and a hole in there, and I can sort of put the whole thing in like that, and that, I think that'll all cover up the wheel again. So let's get the Dremel and just start scalloping out very gently an arch to try and get that wheel in there just below those two triangles. There we go, guys. I think I've done it. So it looks a bit brutal, but it's not that bad. So I've managed to square out the arch, so-called arch, in there and on that side there. And the wheel fits very, very nicely in there. And it fits really nice there and on there. And also when you put the arm back, just there, it covers up really, really well. And the bottom of the dragon, you can see there, the bottom of it fits nice and level, and the wheel is kind of in the middle. So I have to stand the arm ever so slightly off just to give a little bit of clearance, just like that. But that's no different from what it is on this side as well. See, there's a gap there anyway. So on this side here, there'll be just a small gap to match, and that will give plenty of clearance for the wheel. So obviously, I'm not quite sure how I'm going to get that arm to stay where I want it there, but yeah, that's probably something to think about later on. Anyway, so we've got an arch here. Now I'll just go ahead and I'll cut the other 4 arches in all the other corners there because they're all exactly the same, and then we'll think about moving on to the next stage. Okay, so after a few minutes with the Dremel, I've managed to actually Dremel in some wheel arches into his shoulders and his hips, and you can see they all fit just like that. If I try and pick up the whole thing, you will see, right, there we are. So they actually fit quite well. And that front wheel there, in it goes just like that. And the other side, the bear piece is really quite tricky to hold. You can see that one there fits like that. And the back one, as we've already seen, fits like that. You can actually see there that it looks like it's actually going to work. So that is arguably probably the hardest thing that I'm probably going to encounter with this dragon, I think. Obviously, we've got to try and work out how on earth to get the arms back on there, but I'm pretty sure I could put a little pin in there and sort of hold them there somewhere. Anyway, right, so now we've got the wheels fitting at the very least. I think now what I'm going to do is make the little cradles to hold the motor and gearing. That's simply going to be a piece of brass just bent into a U and taken from there, and then I'll make some structure that goes from each pod to each other, overlaps in the middle, and I'll use this vertebrae, if you like, as a pivot, because I think that one there is in the middle, because we've got the shoulders here. Now the middle is actually in the middle, so we'll pivot it in the middle so it moves with the body. Anyway, let's natter, let's do it, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. Okay, so we now have a nice pair of brass chassis to power up our Dragon. And how do they sound? One sounds like that, and the other one sounds like that. Nice and smooth, no problems. So the next job will be to joggle the end of this tongue here by the thickness of the brass so that when they bolt together, the the bottom of the chassis will be nice and smooth, and the bolt that I shall use will have its threads machined off on the bottom so that it's a nice smooth peg to run through the groove in the track. Now you may have noticed that I've changed the pinion from a 10 tooth down to an 8 tooth, and that's brought the gear ratio from 2.2 to 2.75. Now 2.2 would probably do the job, but it's a little bit quick and it's not as much power as a 2.75, because the more RPM you can give on the motor to the least turns on the axle gives you the most amount of power. And there's going to be a lot of friction in this Dragon, so it's power that I want. And to compensate for the fact that I've changed the gear and I've now got to rely on the shaft of the motor in that groove to locate this gear like that longitudinally, that's not really a problem as long as I put a spacer on here and on here so that I can control the end float through those spacers and not so much on the pin on that motor, because this is an aluminium boss. You've got a steel shaft on the motor. You don't really want to be running that steel shaft on aluminium. It's okay on brass, you get away with it for a time, but not on aluminium. So I'm going to make a shim to go on either side once I finalize the fitment of this chassis into the Dragon. Okay, so let's just stop here for a moment, because that's quite a bit of work really, to be honest with you, and it probably needs explaining. So what we've got here, we've got our joggled chassis, so the bottom remains reasonably flat, and I've got these very, very modified slotting plus guides. Now this isn't exactly what I'd envisaged doing right from the start of the video, but these things tend to evolve and take on a life of their own, and you've got to kind of work out problems as you go. And my problem with the pin version is the pin would have to be so thin, about 2.5 mil, that I wasn't very happy with the strength of the pin coming straight out the bottom there. And then I'd still have to collect power. I can collect power from the Dragon's head, but then that has to come all the way back down his body to get to the drive motors that are just back here. So they're better off if I collect power along the chassis where all the weight is. So that's why I've developed these very low profile guides, and then I can solder on wires onto those little turnout tabs at the front, and then they will just come up around the chassis and then collect power into the chassis that way. Now these bottom plates are loose, but it doesn't matter because the guide will keep these bits of copper clad completely separated. There's no way, even if those do move around, there's no way for anything to short out with each other. It'll be absolutely fine. As you can see, each guide is completely independent, so as we go around a nice tight bend, all the guides will just follow like that, and as it goes around the other way, they'll all just follow around like that. So you've got a completely independent chassis, and also it's nice and strong that way around as well, so there's absolutely no problem. That's not folding in the middle, and it's going to be fixed to the Dragon anyway, so there's a little bit less of a chance of it moving, but who cares, it'll all be absolutely fine. So there we are. So that is the chassis, actually all bar wiring, actually finished. So let's now carry on, like I said, and actually add on the extra pieces onto the front to get up into the head. And I think, on hindsight, I am just going to run straight to the head in one bar, and I'll have a pair of wheels in his cheeks, and then probably a guide, or definitely a guide on his chin. That guide will have braid as well, but this time only to power his eyes, because now we've got 3 sets of guides across this chassis. We don't need power collection for the motors anymore. We got plenty within the chassis. So let's crack on, let's get this front end done, and let's get some power to his head. Okay, so with the front end done, we now have something like a twisty dragon chassis, all ready to snake around the track, looking very cool. You can see here the front end is all in with an extra tube so we can support the front end and get that guide all turning nicely. We have a nice big brass block in the front end there, and that's deliberate just to keep a little bit of weight on the front of the chassis as well, because I don't really have any room to put lead weights on there, so I'll utilize that space for that nice block of brass. And we got a little block of brass as well over the guide just to thicken up the guide post and also to add a little bit of weight as well. And you can see we've added in that fourth guide now, which will basically only run the dragon's eyes, and it all turns nice and freely with a little bit of compensation as well. So that's the chassis pretty much completely finished, all bar a little bit of wiring. So now what I've got to try and do is I've got to try and hog out all the relevant parts on this chassis so that we can now, or the body, sorry, so that we can now get that chassis all integrated into the Dragon. And once that's all done, I'll take this apart, we'll give it a quick lick of black paint so you can't see it, and then we'll add a few guides down his tail. And I think I might just stop about halfway down his tail and just let the back ends just flail around a little bit, because I don't honestly think that going around a corner with a guide to the bottom of this tail here is actually going to hold it in the tracks at all. I think it's going to come out, so you may as well let it flick around and do its own thing. So there we are. So let's strip this chassis down, let's hog out this body here and see if we can get the chassis in the body and see if we can get this thing buttoned up, ready to hit the track. Okay, so I think you'll agree the Dragon is coming on very nicely. As you saw in that segment, I glued the head on with some car body filler on that post that I made, and I've wired up the lights or the eyes to the front guide. I fitted the front wheels, so that gets the front end done. You also saw that I painted the entire chassis black, including the motors, because by the time I've hogged out the body parts, a lot of that chassis was actually showing. So I painted the whole lot, but I didn't paint any of the contacts or anything like that, just the body and the chassis. So now we've got good clearance there. Both motors are wired up to this middle guide, and then the front motor is wired up to the front guide, and the rear motor is wired up to the rear guide. So that takes care of all that. And as you can see, the tail is all in. And I did change my plan slightly for these guides on the back of the tail. I did fit in the Skeletrix type guide, but when I fitted them, I wasn't convinced that that tail was going to stay in place, because the guide is very narrow and this tail is very tall and it's very, very unstable. So I ended up going for these PETG discs and then glued those with hot glue onto the bottom of the tail, drilled and put pins into the tail, just ordinary steel pins, and I think that's going to do the job a lot better. As you can see, I've got 4 of them, and I've left the last 6 inches completely loose, because hopefully as the Dragon goes round the corner, the tail will flick all over the place and there'll be enough weight low down to keep it nice and level. So the object of the exercise is not to go around like a racing car, it's just to go around looking cool. But as you will notice, this Dragon will do you absolutely no harm whatsoever, because it's armless. But let's change that and then take her to the track and see what she'll do. And there we are, my awesome 3D printed Dragon running around the track looking really cool. Now I've got to admit, I didn't think at the beginning of this video that this project was going to work. I thought there'd be far too many contacts for those drive tyres to overcome the friction. But as you saw from the track run, she runs quite well. I've got a lot of control down low, and a decent amount of top speed as well. So I'm very, very pleased with it. Now you may have seen this video thinking to yourself, that didn't look very difficult, but I can actually assure you this was one of the most tricky builds that I've actually done on this channel so far. Trying to see a chassis trying to envisage a chassis underneath a body that isn't even there, and also the body being a very weird shape, took quite a bit of thought. I had to go away quite a lot of times and think about what I was going to do, even go to bed and think on it and go through a few ideas as I was sort of laying in bed thinking, how am I going to do that? But as you saw, it actually worked out quite well, and that's the key for doing quite a tricky build. Just think about it. Think about how you're going to do it, and don't just rush in and do one thing, because you might find it might not work. And always be prepared to backpedal 1 or 2 steps, because the job at the end of it is always best done right than if you botch it through and just rush it through because that was the first idea that you had. Never be afraid of actually going back a few steps and undoing some of the work that you've done, because in the long run it's always better to do it right than just to get it done in the moment. Anyway, I hope that you've enjoyed this content, and if you have, maybe you'll subscribe, and if you could hit the little bell button, that would be awesome. So until the next time, thank you very much.